Hello, and welcome to the Eugene Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Vince Casey. This is the first podcast devoted entirely to the Eugene real estate market, where every month we bring on local experts to discuss current trends to help us navigate the ever-changing landscape that is real estate. This week's guest is Joey Dion. Joey shot out of the gate like a cannon his rookie year, quickly becoming a top performer in the industry, and then started to find his niche working with builders and new construction. Joey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vince. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you on. I know you're busy this time of year, and it looks like you're well on your way to creating quite the family over there.
Yeah, the running joke lately has been we are almost there, a full basketball team, all 5 players. But yeah, we're just grateful everyone's happy and healthy.
Any chance there's going to be a 6th man?
No, I think we've reached our peak.
Yeah, I get it. 4 is a lot, and 5 is even more. So I totally understand. I got a little guy of my own, and he keeps me busy enough.
Yeah.
So, Joey, we're seeing that mortgage rates are still on the rise, kind of slightly bumping up a little bit these last few weeks. And we just finished June. Historically speaking, the later we get into summer, the more buyer activity slows down. What has been your experience in this new market?
Great question, Vince. So full disclosure, as Vince mentioned, we just had our 4th baby a couple months ago. So this year, personally, has been a little more focused on the family front. But that being said, with the clients that I have been helping out, in some ways, this newer market is relatively close to a breath of fresh air, because at times it feels a little more balanced. There's actually negotiations typically taking place between buyers and sellers, like there should be in a balanced market. The majority of properties, our days on market has increased relatively significantly, especially if you look at it year over year, or let alone 2 years ago to where we are today. So in that way, the newer market, somewhat of a breath of fresh air, but at the same time, prices are still historically high. Rates have increased significantly in a short period of time, beginning last year, and inventory is still much lower than the demand that's there. So it's kind of a mixed bag. There's pros and cons to every situation, of course.
This past month, we have seen 300 new listings go active and about 374 go pending, which is still technically a seller's market. Do you think if interest rates continue to rise, we will eventually see ourselves in a balanced market?
Another great question, Vince. This one, I appreciate going back a moment just to think of the general economics behind what a balanced market actually is. So typically when we think of a balanced market, it's where your supply is somewhat in balance with your demand. In our area, we're facing less than 2% vacancy of homes. So in short, we aren't going to be anywhere close to a balanced market until we somehow figure out a way to greatly increase our current available supply of homes for people looking to move into them. It's a double whammy, both from the rental side of things as well as the purchase side of things. Because once again, it's not as though we have a bunch of vacant homes or a bunch of extra inventory waiting to hit the market. That's just not the reality of where we are. In fact, we haven't been building enough really since 2008. Even before then, we were trying to keep up with the demand that was there. And even though we were averaging about, 800 new single family permit homes every year, 2015, that dropped down to 400. Last couple of years, we're less than 200 new single family homes hitting the market. So in general, our vacancy issues are not going to diminish unless for some reason there was a mass exodus out of the area, which as we know is not likely to happen. And until we add to that inventory in a physical manner, increasing the amount of supply, even with rates rising, it's basically just pricing more people out, and we're not adding more supply at the same time. So it's a really tricky question, but it's a great one to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. It is and it isn't. Like if you look at our luxury market, it already is starting to shape into a more balanced market. But I think so many of these newer buyers are in that 300 to 400 price point that we're not ever going to see a full relief in that regard. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned in your introduction, you have begun to specialize in new construction. Let's say you have a buyer that has seen everything on the market. They have a specific idea of what they want, and it just isn't out there. So they decide they want to build. What kind of advice are you giving those folks? Could you sort of walk us through the process of starting a project like a new build or new construction?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite parts of new construction is if someone happens to have both not just the vision but also the means to do so. I mean, you can truly go out there and gather the tools, the right team, the right people, and create what you have in mind. That's one of the appeals for new construction for a lot of people. At the same time, it's not necessarily the easiest bar of entry in order to just dive into a new construction project. For example, you need land. For land, you need a significant amount of cash typically in order to acquire the land. If you need more financing for the construction process itself, also need some pocket change in order to make that happen. With that being said, occasionally there's some unique lending programs that come out where, you only need 3% down or 5% down and it'll acquire the land, it'll fund the construction loan, and then it'll also turn into your closeout financing. But in general, before even the means to pay, the new construction process it's one kind of full of both nervous and excitement in the best way, in my opinion, because you are somewhat entirely responsible for creating what you have in mind, right?
Absolutely.
So you got to go through the design stage. Even before the design stage, in my opinion, you should interview other builders or those that are capable of bringing your project to fruition, right? So there's kind of this interview process. Then there's the design process. And then that day when you're actually breaking ground, that nervous excitement, you're watching it happen where, wow, they're actually excavating out the land that we chose with the foundation footprint that we know is going to be built into our completed project. The one thing with new construction is it's known for its unexpected surprises here and there. So of
Sure.
course, it's dependent on a multitude of factors, including, maybe the roofer was scheduled and all of a sudden there were forest fires, right?
Yeah, right.
That's kind of a dark example, but that came up in 2020. And, we had to kind of pivot and figure out how we were able to maintain schedule, but also deal with just the environmental factors that are play. The last couple of years, too, another issue that could arise at times, supply chain, right? But that has also stabilized to a degree where timelines are able to be more in line with what is projected. But I just bring that up as examples where new construction is an adventure, and the more you're willing to kind of embrace it and know that new challenges will arise and there's a new way to overcome them, it's a really exciting process that leads you to the most custom type of home that you would want that's not going to be out there, because you're the one who's actually in charge of deciding, where does this light fixture go? What are the colors of these countertops? Oh, maybe we should actually put the house 20 feet back compared to where it might be if you go out and just buy it when someone else decided to build it there.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of moving parts, and it sounds like the best case scenarios, the perfect storm comes together of finding a great builder and a great design and a great lot, and timelines kind of match up with what's ideal. So I know that I've had folks in my circle that are interested in building. And one of the issues that we run across is a lot of my buyers aren't willing to wait a year or so before occupying their homes. Other than timeline, what type of obstacles do you run across during this purchasing decision?
Yeah, great point. So, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Same thing with your custom home. It's as much as I wish, and as some of the technology that's upcoming, it does, some of these modular homes and being able to really just kind of put them together. Sometimes that timeline can be reduced significantly. We're not quite there yet. It'll be interesting to see what the next 10, 15 years brings in that element with regard to timeline. As I mentioned, another big factor for, we love the idea of being able to build a home, but means the cash in order to do so can be an obvious hurdle for some people too. What I've found is if people are willing to think long-term enough, new construction can be a perfect fit. I'll even speak personally, right? So as Vince and I touched on, my wife and I, we have 4 young kids at home, and we love the idea of them being able to grow up outside, grow up with the garden, and then also we need enough bedrooms where grandparents can visit and the kids will have their own bedroom eventually, and there's not a lot of 6-bedroom homes out there. So even for our own example of new construction could be a good fit for us if we're thinking long enough term. sometimes I've run into clients who've kind of got frustrated with the lack of inventory that we have, which once again, that is a economic situation that I would love to discuss more at an appropriate time. But, you know, you get frustrated at the market and you think, oh, well, maybe it'll be cheaper if I just build it myself and I'll wait, right? And sometimes that can work because there is more of that long-term vision. If you're willing to kind of wait for your construction to take place, yeah, you'll build the home that you have in mind and you can customize it according to what you have in mind. But the reality of the situation is it takes time to build something, especially with the quality that you'd want for an investment like your own home. You don't want people to cut corners. If it's going to take an extra couple of weeks before you move in my opinion, you'd rather have them spend a little extra time doing it well and doing it right than having them cut some corners that might lead to some issues down the line. And so once again, just kind of comes down to really taking your time, evaluating your team and putting that team, your builder, your designer, and making sure that you're working with people that you know have a professional integrity and your best interest in mind first and foremost.
Sure. Is there a couple of builders out there that you really like working with or that you see that are doing like outstanding work?
Yes, definitely. And not that I necessarily want to name drop for this, but I would be always really happy to kind of talk about my favorites. We're fortunate in our area, also just in Oregon in general, we have such strict building standards that for the most part, to a degree, you can't necessarily go wrong on paper, right? So sure. I'm talking about your building codes, your energy standards. That's one thing that's pretty unique about Oregon. In some ways, we're leading the country for our energy standards. Now, depending who you're talking to, that can actually be a frustrating element of building in Oregon because those energy standards typically drive up costs and the state is effectively kind of telling builders how to do their job, right? But I think what we're going for is trying to create a building standard that secures and protects both sides, where the builder is providing a quality product for the purchaser that's going to last over a significant length of time and is being mindful of, like I mentioned, energy codes and et cetera. So, happy to talk about some of my favorites, but I think for this, I would rather we can hold back on that.
All right, mum's the word. I won't tell anyone. So I know we've talked about the housing shortage and people that the city of Eugene is not really expanding their urban growth boundary. If they're doing so, it's very slowly. So does that mean that we're kind of on a land shortage as well? I mean, how many quality lots are out there in Eugene, Springfield, that if somebody did decide they wanted to build, they would be excited about being at this location? Is there a plethora or is it slim, or what's your views?
Yes, great question. So it's kind of funny. The raw land or lot market in general it's similar but very different than our kind of more standard purchase and sale of homes, right? So and if you think about it, it's just there's a smaller buyer pool for people out there buying bare land, right? And by nature of less of a buyer pool, typically speaking, land moves a little bit slower. Simultaneously, like you mentioned, with urban growth boundary and just the general economic situation that we're in, I'd love to ask you this question. You know, out of the remaining buildable land in Eugene, how much of that percentage do you think is actually ready to be built on today?
Oh, wow. You mean power and water and sewer and all that?
Correct. Yep. And not a trick question. This isn't graded. Just throwing it out there.
Sure. I'm just going to throw out 25%. That's a bit of an uneducated guess. One of my observations has been a lot of the land that's available is still kind of on hills or sloping land, which is usually more expensive to build on as well.
Correct. Yeah. So that's another thing. You know, not all land is equal with regard to build costs, right? But then also what is in our current, available according to the city, what is buildable land, only 48% of it is actually readily buildable today. And the difference, why it's buildable versus not buildable, like you already mentioned, there's no water, there's no sewer, there's no electric, and it would be kind of short-sighted to go in and try to put a well in or a septic in, something that's eventually going to be a subdivision down the line, right?
Sure.
With that being said, props to the city for making some forward movement because they've actually secured some funding and they are going to begin addressing that, borderline dismal ratio of buildable land that's actually not buildable in today's shape and form. So going back to your original question, how many lots are available? I don't have the current number as of today. But the lot market can be exciting as long as you, once again, kind of have the means to do it, because you're not going to find 0% financing for bare land, typically speaking, outside of very unique situations involving, rare, there's a certain promotion for a loan type that'll help out with that. So
Right.
does that kind of answer what you were asking?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. That's, I figured it was kind of an inconclusive question. I was just curious if you had, helped a buyer and they searched out a lot that they really enjoyed and the building process went smoothly. Yeah.
Well, and there is, and that's the thing. It's just, once again, it's more of kind of the long approach. And then when something that fits the vision arrives, you got to be ready to kind of jump on it, if that makes sense. And jumping on doesn't mean you're not doing your due diligence to make sure that the soil type's correct, or et cetera, whatever number of factors you want to double check. But once again, it's a smaller market because, like you mentioned, we're already short on houses. So we're typically short on land to a degree as well due to our zoning and et cetera. But there is a way to get it done, and people get it done, and the pricing and the slope of the lot, a lot goes into it, but working with a great real estate agent that is familiar with this makes all the difference too.
For sure. With the cost of building materials at an all-time high, I was kind of curious if you had like a price per square foot or a general cost. I know that's going to vary from some of the lower end builders to the high end builders, but what are you seeing out there as far as costs?
Yeah, great question. So once again, as much of a fan as I am for real estate, there's so many different metrics of data that we can try to utilize. And we like to go to ones that are somewhat kind of short and snappy in the sense of rule of thumb. This is what this is going to be. But of course, it's real estate, so there's a lot of factors at play. And in short, I appreciate you bringing up, it really depends on what you're building, right?
Absolutely.
It might be $200 square foot to throw up a Walmart or something. And these are just made up numbers, right? But then you want to throw up a hospital, all of a sudden it's going to be $1,200 a square foot. For residential, thankfully, it's not that as extreme, because generally speaking, if you're building a residential house, you have your foundation expenses, your framing, your bathrooms, your kitchen, your cabinets, your roof, et cetera, right? So you can kind of replicate. Depending what you have in mind, costs have gone up. So it used to be more common to see, $175, $200 a square foot for quality materials. It wasn't as though you're going to have everything, gold carat line trim or, something like that. But it was going to be quality materials that are going to last over time and you're comfortable in it, and not in a, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that 175 has quickly changed more. 250 would be the lower side for that. And, that's your... Once again, it's quality. You're getting really nice flooring, you're getting real wood, you're getting lifetime roof. It's what you'd want and kind of what you're more used to seeing for new construction, right? But once again, if you wanted to go bigger, it's quite easy to fill a construction budget with whatever you dream of. Okay, so for example, $350 a square foot or $325 a square foot, even for something like just a quality ADU, that's becoming more and more common. It also varies drastically depending who you're working with, just due to how they price, how they source, who they're working with, etc. So as a general benchmark, I would say at a minimum, expect about $250 a square feet. Of course, people hear those numbers and think that their Uncle George could do it a lot cheaper. And, props to Uncle George if they can. But most of the time, those stories just aren't true because they aren't aligned with the times and where we are today, right? So once again, I would start at least 250. Realistically, it might be closer to 300, 325. And if you're getting even more custom, or let's say you want to get higher end appliances or et cetera, just using or a tile roof, right? It's really easy to inflate that number to 400 very quickly.
Yeah, and not everybody is going to find like a floor plan that works for them. So if you're looking at hiring an architect to design your plan, that's just going to add to that cost too.
Yes, and it depends. For example, I work really closely with an architect builder in town, and that's part of the offerings that they provide their clients. They are an architect and they're a builder simultaneously, right? There's a couple others in town too. I just don't happen to have a working relationship with them, and so it just, like I said, the thing with new builds in general is it's not like ordering something off Amazon, right? You have 20 different people, 20 different suppliers. That product's going to show up in your mail at a certain time because you ordered it off Amazon, is going to be there, right? With new construction, It's totally a different ballpark. It's not nearly as streamlined as what we've kind of gotten used to, where we turn on Netflix and we're watching our movie right away, right? There's a lot more moving pieces at play, and there's a lot of different ways to build a similar structure. And that, for example, let's just use a random 2,000 square foot house. You hire one person, it might be 225 a square foot. You hire another person, it might be 375 a square foot. It might be comparable materials, but I mean, like I said, it's not as simple as just product A equates to product B. And that's where that interview process and making sure you find a good fit that you can trust, and then being really deliberate with your contract goes a very long way.
Yeah, it sounds like this is definitely a point in your life where you might want to get 3 or 4 different quotes from different people and just sit down and really take time to review your options.
Correct. Yep. And I'm a big fan of that. Yeah, well said.
So I know one question that a lot of our listeners have is, what type of financing is involved with new construction?
Great question, Vince. In short, new construction is a little funny just because we have what are called construction loans available for new construction, right? And so you'll acquire a construction loan that will fund your construction process, but that's not your closeout financing. So let's say, go through the whole process, excavation through foundation, and then eventually you're at final cleaning. Even prior to that final cleaning process, the inspectors, whether it's city or county, depending where you're building, they will come on out and they'll issue, some jurisdictions have slightly different language, but effectively in the city of Eugene, it's called a certificate of occupancy. As soon as that certificate of occupancy is issued, your local escrow or title that you happen to be working with, they'll be able to issue your title insurance. With that, any loan type goes, right? So your conventional, your FHA, your VA, depending where you are, your USDA, whatever loan type, federally backed, can be issued with new construction. So you don't necessarily need a fancy type of financing in order to close a new construction home. That said, though, once again, new construction, oftentimes people will utilize I've already touched on, the construction loans. So you'll get financing for that process depending the builder that you're working with. For example, my go-to, he is willing to acquire a construction loan on behalf of the qualified buyers, as long as they're willing to put in the equity amount. And then he actually handles the construction draw process, which is a monthly agreement with the lender. The funds have been utilized for this, verify that the work's done, etc. So in short, don't need anything fancy upon completion once that certificate of occupancy is issued. If you do want to utilize construction loans, there's just a little more red tape. And then also some people actually go more the private money route, especially with rates where they are today. There isn't always as big a gap between your prime bank rate, which is typically what you'll be utilizing for your construction loan, versus your hard money lending. And sometimes that hard money lending can remove some of that red tape just to help, it's less overhead for the builder to have to dive into that Excel spreadsheet and do the draws in the same way as you typically have to with the bank.
So is a construction loan typically a point or two higher than a conventional loan?
Yeah, it's typically based off whatever the bank prime rate happens to be at that time, right? So it's more in alignment with, at least a point or two higher than what your conventional mortgage rate would be. But like I said, it's more the bank prime rate.
Right. Have you seen somebody start a project with a new construction loan and then once it's completed, refinance under a conventional loan?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the construction loans, as the name implies, it's meant to be utilized just for the construction process itself. The other thing that's kind of unique about construction loans is you're only paying on interest during that construction process for the amount of funds that you've already drawn out of that construction loan. So with construction loans, once again, you have a monthly draw. Typically, it's once a month. In order to get the next funds for either work that was completed the previous month or the work that's coming up the next month. And each time you draw, your monthly interest charge is going to begin to increase a bit. And that's where timelines are, once again, a very important element in the new construction process. And a good builder, they don't always have the crystal ball, of course, but they'll do whatever they can to remain as close to that timeline as possible, especially when a construction loan is being utilized.
That's some great information there, Joey. Thank you so much.
Of course. I love talking about this stuff.
Well, speaking of enjoying things, What do you enjoy most about the option to build your own home?
Yeah. So once again, as I mentioned, kind of similar to the example you brought up, where you have a client who's somewhat frustrated with what's available on the market. It just doesn't quite feel as though it's what they have in mind. The element of autonomy involved in new construction, even though you're not, it's not cheap. You got to have cash, an element of cash, not necessarily 100%, of course. You have to have some patience. But if you can hold that vision and you can really bring something beautiful to fruition, and even buying a home that someone else built, there's a sense of pride in that. When you come home at the end of the day, you're coming to your own home. You know what I mean? Even just that's another reason I love real estate, the tangibility of it. You feel it. You breathe it, literally.
Yeah.
It is your shelter. And
100%.
Once again, with just the way life has unfolded and the blessings of, my wife, Jess, and I, we've had 4 kids in the last 4.5 years, and not quite the basketball team, but we're good and we're happy and they're happy. And, but I love the idea of being able to be very deliberate and intentional of how we continue to cultivate, a house, land that fits and matches closer to our values and lifestyle. Because once again, we oftentimes we take for granted how much the environment around us directly impacts our day-to-day being and just consciousness in general, frankly, not to get too macro. So yeah, ring me back in, Vince, because I could keep going. There's a lot to love about it.
Well, in closing, I would say what we've learned here today is basically, if you're looking into new construction, you want to have some time on your hands. You can't necessarily be in a hurry. You're going to need to have some cash on hand in order to invest in the land and get the construction process started. And you're going to want to be selective with who you choose to work with, and probably also have a good conversation with a local realtor before getting started. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think those 3 are definitely the key 3. And like I said, holding the vision and know you can make it happen. That's another thing I love about it is affirm in life. There is a way to get it done. It can be a beautiful process even with the time of it. And yeah,
for sure. Well, if someone got inspired by this conversation today and wants to reach out to you to ask more questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Frankly, just my direct cell phone. I'm a big believer in just direct straight to me. Phone number is 541-525-6956. Please let me know that you listen to this, and I would love to let Vince know someone reached out. We also get a lot of spam calls, so it'd be great to know that you're human and not a robot. So yeah, just feel free to reach out, and no pressure, of course, even just kind of chat through. It's kind of hard to condense all the information into a short form like this. So I really appreciate the opportunity, Vince, to be able to dive in with you. And yeah, reach out anytime, text, call 541-525-6956.
Yeah, it's a great starting point to sort of get some of these basic topics off the way. But with most things real estate related, it's a rabbit hole, and the deeper you dive, the more information you get. So really appreciate all the information that you gave us today. Well, folks, that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank Joey for being on today. I'd like to thank our sponsor, House to Home Construction. And I want to thank Patty Rose for producing the show. And I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Next week's guest is Tiffany Matthews to talk about luxury homes. Good night, and we'll see you next time.
If you have a question for the show, feel free to email us at eugenerealestatepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to work with Vince Casey as a buyer or seller, please email him at vincecaseyrealestate@gmail.com. Be sure to mention this podcast with House to Home Construction to receive up to $500 off any roof bid from a competitor in writing.